You keep running the numbers. If you had stayed in that job another 3 years, if you had left that marriage 2 years earlier, if you had taken that offer when it came, the one that felt too big, too risky, too much like something you didn't quite deserve. If you had called your father that last summer when he mentioned his knee hurt and you said you'd call back. If you had stopped waiting until the timing felt right and just submitted the application, started the conversation, booked the flight. You lie awake at 2 a.m. doing this math, and the answer is always the same. A version of yourself who made the other choices. A version who has everything figured out, who is sleeping soundly, who doesn't lie awake doing this. You've been carrying this for a while now, the quiet arithmetic of the unchosen life. But here's what's strange. It's not the wrong choices that haunt you longest. It's the ones you never made at all. And somewhere around 40, it gets heavier. Not because you failed, you probably haven't, not by any objective measure, but because the window is starting to feel different, less open. The possibilities that once floated around the edges of your life have started to resolve. You're not becoming everything you might have been. You're becoming something specific. And that specificity, that narrowing, is grief, even when nobody names it as grief. Here's what I want to talk about today. There's an idea. It's old. It comes from Nietzsche and before him from the Stoics, called amor-fati, love of fate, not acceptance of fate, not tolerance, not everything happens for a reason, love. The deliberate, chosen turning toward what has happened, including the parts that broke something in you, as the actual material of your life. Most people encounter this idea as a tattoo or a motivational quote, and if that's all it is, it's useless. Maybe worse than useless because it can feel like being told to smile at your own wound. But I came across this concept in a different way, through the psychology of what actually happens inside a person who reaches midlife, the cognitive machinery, the specific grief of the unchosen, the way regret works over time. And when I put those two things together, the psychology and the philosophy, something became clearer. The question is not, how do I stop regretting? The question is, what am I actually doing when I use the past as evidence against myself? And what would it mean to stop? Let me start with what your brain is doing. When you lie awake running the numbers, if I had stayed, if I had left, if I had chosen, you're doing something that psychologists call counterfactual thinking. What might have been? Your brain is running a simulation. It takes the facts of your life, changes one variable, and asks, what would the world look like? This is a deeply human thing. It's probably what makes us capable of planning and learning. You can imagine a future that doesn't exist yet, and you can imagine a past that didn't happen. The problem is what this does to regret over time. Two researchers, Thomas Gilovich and Victoria Medvec, published a study in 1994 that I keep coming back to. They asked people about their regrets, and they found something that is counterintuitive at first, but makes complete sense once you sit with it. In the short term, people regret things they did. The thing you said at the dinner table that changed how someone looked at you. The resignation letter you sent at midnight. But in the long term, over years, over decades, the regrets shift. The actions fade. What stays, what aches, what keeps a person awake at 2 a.m. are the things they didn't do. The salary negotiation they prepared for and then didn't mention. The flight they almost booked. The morning they drove to the trailhead, sat in the car for 20 minutes and went home. Gilovich and Medvec found this was true across cultures. They replicated the finding in Japan. It held. Long-term regret is overwhelmingly regret of inaction, the roads not taken, not regret of the things you actually did. Consider what that means if you are 40. At 40, this is where the asymmetry is sharpest. The short-term regrets, the marriages that didn't work, the job you quit badly, the thing you said to your father in 2009 that you've never quite forgiven yourself for. Those have had time to soften. They're real. They're still there. But they have context now. What doesn't soften in the same way is the other thing, the life you didn't attempt. There's a psychological term for this. The name is somewhat clinical. The experience is anything but. Hazel Marcus and Paula Neurius, writing in 1986, described something they called possible selves. The idea is exactly what it sounds like. Your sense of self is not only the person you are right now. It includes the people you believe you could become. And it includes, crucially, the people you once believed you might become and no longer do. You carry your possible selves with you. The person who was going to write the novel. The person who was going to travel before settling down. The person who was going to find the right partner before having children. Or have children before the window closed. Or leave the career before it ate a decade. The person who was going to be braver. The person you were at 28, who still had time for anything. When those possible selves become impossible, not because of something catastrophic, but simply because time passed and choices were made, there is a specific kind of grief. It's not the grief of losing someone. It's the grief of losing a version of yourself that never actually existed, but felt completely real. And what makes this particular grief so hard to carry is that it has no social form. When someone dies, there is a funeral. There are people who acknowledge what happened. There is language for it. Loss, mourning, condolence. The culture makes space. The grief is permitted. When a possible self dies, none of that exists. You don't get to call in sick because you finally understood on a Wednesday in October that you are never going to be the version of yourself who moved to another city at 29 and became someone different. Nobody sends flowers for that. Nobody asks how you're holding up. You can't explain it at a dinner party without sounding like you're complaining about a life that, by most measures, is fine. So the grief goes unspoken. It accumulates in the margins of ordinary days, in the moment before sleep, in the pause between tasks, in the way certain songs still catch in your chest years after you stop listening to them for a reason. It has nowhere to go because there is no acknowledged loss to organize around, only an absence, a door that closed so quietly you almost didn't hear it. This is, I think, the specific weight of turning 40. Not a crisis, exactly. Most people don't have a crisis. The MacArthur Foundation ran a 10-year study of midlife, nearly 3,500 people, and found that only about 23% reported what you'd call a dramatic midlife crisis. And when they did, it was usually triggered by a specific event, not by the decade itself. What most people experience is quieter. It's not a breakdown. It's a reckoning. It's standing in your kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon and knowing, not dramatically, not tearfully, just knowing that certain versions of yourself are gone, not lost, not postponed, gone. And the question of how to live with that is one that most of us are figuring out alone, because nobody talks about it this way. Here is where I want to introduce amor-fati, as a question really, not a prescription or an answer, but a very precise question about what you are doing with your past. Nietzsche coined the phrase. He wrote, My formula for human greatness is amor-fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity. And I know how that sounds. Like denial. Like someone who has decided that pretending is easier. The philosophical equivalent of good vibes only. But what Nietzsche was describing, and what the Stoics before him were circling around, is something much more specific. He wasn't saying the divorce was good. He wasn't saying the wasted decade was secretly a gift. He wasn't asking you to be grateful for any of it. He was asking a different question entirely. What is the alternative? Because the alternative, the one most of us live in at 2 a.m., is to treat what happened as a verdict, to carry your past not as something that occurred, but as evidence. Evidence that you made wrong choices, that you are a person who makes wrong choices, that the version of you running the numbers right now is proof of a fundamental failing. And here is the thing worth naming. That is not a neutral position. That is a choice. It is a story you are telling about your own life. And it is a story that has consequences. A researcher at the University of Michigan, Edward Chang, published a study in 2025 that tried to measure amor-fati as an actual psychological variable. He surveyed 111 Americans between 35 and 60. And he found that people who scored higher on amor-fati, who were better at this deliberate turning toward their fate, showed greater flourishing and less languishing. They had stronger social connections, less loneliness, and this is the part worth holding. They weren't people who had easier lives or fewer setbacks than anyone else. They were people who had developed a different relationship to what had happened to them. Chang described amor-fati not as passive acceptance, but as a joyful, deliberate engagement with everything life throws at you, including suffering. That word, deliberate, is the one I keep coming back to, because this is where amor-fati gets misread. Most people read it as resignation, a kind of shrug, a learned helplessness dressed up in Latin. It is the opposite. It is an act. It requires something of you, specifically a decision about what your past is for, not what it means. Meaning is often too neat, too theological, too much like everything happens for a reason. That phrase is, I think, genuinely harmful because it asks you to construct a justification. It asks you to find the silver lining. It converts grief into a homework assignment. Amor-fati is not that. Amor-fati is not. The divorce happened so that you could meet someone better. Amor-fati is the divorce happened. It is part of what formed you. The version of you who never went through it doesn't exist. What exists is you, specific, shaped by that, standing here with that particular architecture of hurt and knowledge and resilience. And that person is not less than the imagined alternative. That person is more real than the imagined alternative. The imagined alternative is not a person. It is a possibility that died the moment you made the other choice. It never had a body. It never had consequences. It never had to carry anything. You did. There's a distinction here that I want to be careful about. There is a difference between acceptance and resignation. And there is a difference between amor-fati and toxic positivity. The channel between them is narrow enough that people often fall off one side or the other. Resignation says, nothing can change, so it doesn't matter what I do. It is a giving up. Amor-fati is not a giving up. It is a turning toward. It says, this is what happened. I am made of it. What I do with it now is still entirely open. Toxic positivity says, find the good in everything. Be grateful. Look on the bright side. It is, underneath, a refusal to be with what is hard. Amor-fati does not ask you to find the bright side or to feel grateful for the loss. It asks something stranger and harder. It asks you to stop treating the loss as something other than your actual life. Your actual life is not the one playing out in your head at 2 a.m. Your actual life is the one you're living. All of it. The wrong turn and the right one. The decade that went sideways and the decade that rebuilt. The relationship that broke something in you and the understanding that grew in the wreckage. This is the material. Not the raw material for something better. Not the foundation for the real story that starts now. This is the story. It has already been happening. The specific texture of who you are, the way you read a room, the things you find funny, the things that still make you flinch, the depth you have that came from surviving something. None of that would exist without exactly the path that got you here. And I know that sounds like a consolation, but I want to push a little further. Think about the thing you've been calling your biggest mistake. Not in a self-flagellating way. Just pick one. The thing that comes up at 2 a.m. The choice that, in a different version of your life, you would have made differently. Now ask, not what good came from it, not what lesson it taught you, not what silver lining it had, but simply, what happened next because of it, not as a moral conclusion. Just factually, what exists in your life now that is downstream of that thing? People you know, skills you have, the winter you didn't think you'd get through, the self you had to become because that option closed and another one unexpectedly opened. Decisions you would never have made without the context of that experience. None of that requires you to feel grateful. It only requires you to see that the counterfactual, the version where the mistake didn't happen, is not simply your current life minus a problem. It is a completely different life, with completely different downstream consequences, none of which you can know, some of which would have been worse, some better, all of them different. Here's what that looks like in practice. Imagine a marriage that ended at 37. Wrong time, wrong reasons, years that still sting when examined too closely. In the parallel simulation, you never marry that person. Problem solved. But downstream of the actual marriage, a city you moved to because of it, a job you took to rebuild yourself in that city, a colleague who became a friend, the kind of friend you called at 11 p.m. when you got the diagnosis and who drove over anyway, a version of yourself who learned, the hard way, where your real limits are. That knowledge is not theoretical. It lives in you now, in the way you now say no when the answer is no. Without the 2-week delay, without rewriting the email 4 times. None of that exists in the version where the marriage doesn't happen. Not the friend, not the city, not that particular knowledge of yourself. The counterfactual isn't your life with the pain removed. It's an entirely different life, belonging to an entirely different person, one who is still learning what you already know. The version of you who made the other choice is not you. It is a stranger who happened to share your face before the path divided. You are the one who came this way. Erik Erikson, the developmental psychologist, described a central tension of midlife that I think maps onto this conversation exactly. He called it generativity versus stagnation. In his model, the great psychological task of this period of life is not achievement. It's not accumulation. It's the question of whether your life, as it has actually been lived, becomes something you can use. Something that gives back. Something that means more than the arithmetic of wins and losses. Generativity is not about being productive. It's about being able to take what you have, including the broken pieces, the failed experiments, the years you'd rather not account for, and find a way to make it count for something beyond yourself, for the people around you, for the work you still do, for who you are still becoming. Stagnation is what happens when you can't do that. When you get stuck in the numbers, when the mental replay runs continuously, and the actual life in front of you becomes somehow less real than the life that didn't happen. I think amor-fati is, in psychological terms, what makes generativity actually possible. It's the act of taking what happened and making it yours. Not your wound, not your verdict, but genuinely yours. Something you carry forward because it is inextricably part of you, and because carrying it forward is different from dragging it behind you. Which is where Marcus Aurelius comes in. Or rather, where he's been the whole time. There's a line from Marcus Aurelius that I come back to more often than almost anything else I've read. He wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." This is often used motivationally. Obstacles are opportunities, which is fine, it's not wrong. But I think that reading is too optimistic, too clean. It skips over the grief. What Marcus was actually doing when he wrote the Meditations was not writing a self-help book. He was writing to himself. He was a man at the height of enormous power and responsibility, running an empire, losing children, watching friends die, fighting wars he didn't want to fight. And he was trying daily to maintain his own humanity inside a life that kept throwing impossible things at him. He was not telling himself to be positive. He was telling himself that the obstacle is real, that the grief is real, that the loss is real, and that the only question is what you do with it from here. The impediment becomes the way, not because the impediment was secretly helpful, because there is only one road, the one that goes through what actually happened, and the question is whether you walk it or stand in front of it forever, running the numbers about the road that didn't exist. Let me tell you where I land on this, with a question, not a conclusion, not a framework. At some point, 5 years from now, 10, whenever, you will tell a story about who you were at 40. You will have some version of the story in which the wrong turns and the losses and the things you didn't do were part of something. They will be part of a person, the person you became. That story will exist. It always does. We are always, looking back, the protagonist of a coherent narrative. Meaning is something humans construct after the fact. What matters is what kind of story you are deciding to tell. Because that story is not only about the past, it shapes what you do next. The person who carries the past as verdict will make different choices than the person who carries it as material. Not better or worse necessarily, just shaped by what they believe the evidence shows about who they are. And here's something worth holding. Research covering 31 studies found that something like 90% of adults carry significant life regret. And midlife is when it tends to peak. Almost everyone, almost every person you know who's navigating this decade is running some version of the same numbers you are, lying awake doing the same arithmetic, mourning some version of a possible self. You are doing what it means to be 40. Which is to be specific enough, finally, that the alternatives have become real in a different way. The alternatives are real not because they were better. They're real because they're gone. And that is its own kind of grief. And that grief is legitimate, and nobody takes it away by telling you to love your fate. But here's the thing. Loving your fate, in the actual sense, not the tattoo sense, is not about feeling good about what happened. It's about deciding that the story is not finished. The wrong turn is part of the road. The lost decade is part of the map. The possible self who never lived is genuinely gone, and you can mourn that person. You can sit with that loss. You can acknowledge that it cost something real. And then you can come back to this. The version of you who chose differently is not here. You are here, with everything you carry. And you are, right now, at 40, at whatever mile marker you've reached, more specific, more shaped, more genuinely and completely yourself than you have ever been before. Not despite the path, because of it. I'll leave you with one question. At 50, when you look back at who you were at 40, at the person running the numbers at 2 a.m., carrying the weight of the unchosen, doing the arithmetic of the possible, what do you want to have done with it? Not what do you want to have achieved. What do you want to have done with the weight itself? Either way, that's what I've been sitting with. If this is something you've been carrying, if you recognize that 2 a.m. arithmetic, I'd love to know how you're sitting with it. Leave it in the comments. And if you're finding these conversations useful, subscribing keeps them coming. Take care of yourselves.